Isambolo Vinaka, Noaya, Talafalava, Malwalele, Kirana, Muri, Maloni, hello Olgat, and warm Pacific greetings. My name is Anawaite Matadradra, and I'm affiliated with the University of the South Pacific. My presentation today is titled The Experiences of Melanesian Laborers and Their Descendants in Fiji and Samoa. Before I begin, I would first likely to acknowledge the Melanesians in Fiji, Nabakamanakaliabu, Sabakmulitikibikem Donakango Nakawaka Solomoni, Nakawaka Melanese Viti, and also the Melanesians in Samoa, of Atufoila, Fafetai, Malefa Alwalo, Itamoli, Omosamo, Saofia, Ilipolakala Mufafeta Waina, Ala Pacifica, who have been part of my research journey. I pay my respects to the elders, past and present. I also extend that respect to descendants of the Melanesians in Fiji and Samoa who were part of the labor trade recruitment process that are here today. This research presentation is a comparative historical study of the experiences of Melanesian laborers and their descendants in Fiji and in Samoa between the periods 1864 to 1911 in Fiji, for Melanesians in Fiji, and 1870 to 1940 for those in Samoa. These communities are descended from the Melanesian laborers who worked on the colonial plantations in the Pacific Islands in the 19th and early 20th century, and are believed to have originated from the New Hebrides, the Solomon Islands, and Buka, and areas around the Bismarck Archipelago. And this paper, this presentation, it examines an aspect of the history of the labor trade and the growth of plantations in Fiji and in Samoa by examining the historical evolution of the identities, the social and economic status and prospects of these Melanesian minorities in their newly formed communities. Today, the Melanesian settler communities, just like other migrant communities, are numerically small. They are marginalized and have little influence on public policies, and this concern was demonstrated in interviews that recorded the stories of Melanesian descendants, both in Fiji and Samoa, who are still living and experiencing this oppression and injustice that was encountered by their ancestors. So basically, the Melanesian laborers, they were part of a broader pattern of exploitation of migrant labor for plantations in Fiji and Samoa, and they were the lifeblood of these two colonial economies. Melanesian laborers who worked on colonial plantations in Fiji have been referred to under different or many labels over time. For Europeans who orchestrated the trade in the 19th century, it was common to refer to almost all the Pacific Islanders as Polynesian in general. And in Fiji, all those of Melanesian origin who came during the labor trade period, they were categorized as Solomoni, regardless of their country of origin. And this is even though the first laborers were Ni Vanuatuans or Ni from the New Hebrides. Most Fijians, even today, they believe that all Melanesian descendants, they came from the Solomon Islands. Hence, this is why they use the word Solomoni or Kai Solomoni. However, the Melanesian descendants in Fiji today, they prefer the term Melanesian as it is more inclusive. In the case of Samoa, the term Kanaka was used exclusively for those Melanesians who were recruited to work on the European plantations. And the word Kanaka, it's a Samoan word that is translates as tangata, which means people or human beings, and it was widely used in Melanesia by colonial settlers to refer to indigenous people there. However, among the indigenous Samoans, they called them the Otamauli, which translates to the black boys. It could mean it meant black boys. And for the descendants of Melanesian workers who married and stayed on in Samoa, they preferred Otamauli over O Solomona, which refers to Melanesians of Solomon descendants living in Samoa. Andorra Kuva Talalele Tapu Levilaka, Winston Halapo, and Eseta Mativiti Tulavu are a few Pacific scholars who have links to Melanesian descendants in Fiji, and have given detailed descriptions of experiences of the indenture in the process of assimilation into the communities they live in. There are Samoan scholars such as Malama Malaysia, Asinatiliki, and Anita Lata in New Zealand who have written historical accounts of Melanesians in Samoa, the migrant Melanesian women, the Teniuli, and the experiences they encountered. And the studies in the mid-1980s, they focused mostly on the plantation experiences of Pacific laborers and the challenges of the historical conditions. However, there is no recent account of the contemporary lives of Melanesian communities in Fiji and in Samoa. For this research, the phenomenological qualitative method was used to interview Melanesian descendants in these communities, which allowed them to share their lived experiences. So their stories, it formed the foundation of this study, and this was supplemented by archival research, which shed light on their backgrounds and life experiences and current issues concerning their descendants. And the research methods for this paper, it incorporated both secondary and primary sources of information and data gathering. So here is an image of Melanesian settlements in Fiji today. Today there are 44 Melanesian settlements spread across Fiji. There is 22 Melanesian communities in the Central Division. There are 6 in the Western Division, 6 in the Eastern Division, and there are about 10 Melanesian settlements in the Northern Division. In Samoa, there are only 5 Melanesian communities on the island of Upolu in Samoa, and they are in Songi, which is located at the heart of Apia. We have Vaitele Uta, Falelani Aele, and also Mulifanua, which is not shown in this image, sorry. It's located closer towards the Faleola airport. And for each locality, the oral histories of the establishment of these Melanesian communities and their genealogies, as well as their life stories of Melanesian descendants, were collected and analyzed. The research has made an important comparison of the historical experiences of Melanesian laborers in Fiji and Samoa and the different trajectories their descendants are following. It is found that the contemporary challenges both communities face in Fiji and Samoa are similar, but also different in very distinct ways. For Melanesians in Fiji, and in Samoa today, they continue to face these similar challenges and insecurities, and this was explored by understanding how they are politically represented, their access to land, services, housing, employment opportunities, even education and also training opportunities. So basically, the Melanesian descendants have been integrated into the wider community within Fiji through intermarriages within the indigenous community, and this has allowed them to gain access to land, housing, education, and better opportunities. And even despite this, the Melanesian descendants, they feel that they're still marginalized in society. This is probably because of the labor trade experiences and the progressive displacement over time, which has caused a sense of inferiority, which has become ingrained and it has become like sort of accepted part of the Melanesian descent life, both in Fiji and in Samoa. So the historical sense of marginalization and deprivation as minorities is overwhelming, and land has been a major problem for both groups, especially in the settlements they live in. Their living conditions, they differ greatly depending on where they live and how they find employment and education. And the Christian churches have played a significant role in the development of both these communities, and it continues to remain an important part of their cultural identity. So while both these communities experience similar displacement and exploitation, they continue to remain minorities in these respective countries and have adapted to the political and social structures of Fiji and Samoa in different ways. One key point of difference between these Melanesian communities in Fiji and Samoa can be explained by the relationship between their host kinship systems. Although those of Melanesian ancestries, they share cultural similarities. They have lived alongside them. Itoges in Fiji for long periods, and they are not just constitutionally recognized in the same way that the Itoge are in terms of access to land, education, and commercial opportunities. Because of these traditional kinship structures in Fiji and Samoa, Melanesian descendants have been able to integrate more effectively into Samoan societies, while those Melanesian descendants in Fiji are not assimilated to the same extent, perhaps due to the strict patrilineal kinship structure of Fiji. In Samoa, being Polynesian, it separates most of them from Samoan villages, as their ethnicity places them in a lower social and political class. However, through intermarriages, it has provided many of them with some kind of entrenched representation, where they have become chiefs, what we call matai, and they stand as candidates for general elections to parliament. And in Samoa, people of mixed descent, they can be traditionally recognized as Samoans, and like other Samoans, they can rise to a position of significant wealth and power, while this may not be the case of Fiji. So in conclusion, the presentation, it focused on the legacy of the labor trade in Fiji and Samoa, exploring stories of descendants who are part of this emerging urban Solomoni, Fijian and Melanesian Samoan settlements. It documents the phenomena of the labor trade migration by exploring the historical development of identity formation in the new localities and evaluating the social and economic status and prospects of descendants of Melanesian minorities. All Melanesian settlements in Fiji and Samoa, they have challenges they encounter daily in terms of access to land, in terms of land tenure issues, insecurities around political representation, as well as access to housing, land, services, jobs, education, and training opportunities. The indigenous people and other minority groups of Fiji and Samoa have little opportunity to engage socially, economically, or politically as a result of these colonial histories of separate development of their people. And as a result, there are stereotypes and prejudices that have evolved that have resulted in these socioeconomic inequalities. Generations of Melanesian descendants, they believe that aspirations for reform and a better future are rendered futile without targeted policies. So as a result, Melanesians in Fiji and Samoa, they hope to be legally recognized and have equal representation as other ethnic groups in their different constituency and parliaments. They hope to be given better education opportunities to further studies, allowing them to break free from this destructive cycle of poverty that they sometimes find themselves in. And it is their plea that their government investigates the plight of displaced and improvised landless minority Melanesian communities by establishing programs that would provide alternative livelihoods and good quality and affordable social housing for them, especially those in the urban areas. And they hope that there'll be affirmative action initiatives that will be implemented that will accommodate their needs and improve their living conditions. They also hope to be given a platform or forum where they can participate in dialogue and decision making on development issues in their respective settlements and regions, as well as a representative to coordinate their settlements outside of these indigenous village borders, particularly for development of projects and other natural disaster resource management measures. And finally, they hope that the government would someday review the management and administration of the district village advisory council, as well as its role and functions, to ensure that they are focused on the welfare of these non-indigenous communities and the development of their settlements. Excuse me. So thank you again for being part of my presentation. I look forward to your comments and your feedback. Vinaka.